How does the GLBP process work? Well, let's examine this topology and walk through it together. Currently, R1 is the AVG, and R2 is our standby AVG. R1 is also the active virtual forwarder, AVF1, and R2 is our active virtual forwarder, AVF2. The virtual IP address that is being utilized in the topology is 192.168.1.1, and the virtual MAC address for AVF1 ends in 01, and the virtual MAC address for AVF2 ends in 02. So when the GLBP process started on R1 and R2, R1 was elected the AVG, and then it handed out these virtual MAC addresses to its own interface and R2. Now, our clients have been configured with 192.168.1.1 as their default gateway, which is the virtual IP address for this GLBP group. So they send out their ARP request. It's a broadcast. So it's going everywhere within this layer 2 topology. So they're going out here, they're going across here, they're going up here, they're going down here. And what about these clients? It's going up here, going here, going here. Right? The ARP's going absolutely everywhere throughout the topology. So who's responsible for answering these ARP requests? It is the AVG, the Active Virtual Gateway. And notice what's happening here. The AVG says PC1, use the MAC address that ends in 01. PC2, use the MAC address that ends in 02. PC3, use the MAC address that ends in 01. Well, what's happening here? Well, the load balancing is being done in a round-robin fashion. And this is by default. So R1 is just going to give out 01, and then the next ARP request is 02, the next ARP request is 01, the next one 02, the next one 01, the next one 02, and so on and so forth. So this is the round-robin style of load balancing. However, you can change it with the GLBP group number load balancing command. You can specify round robin, which is the default, weighted, or host dependent. So what is weighted? Well, you can specify a weight value. So for example, it is 100 by default. As a result, if you change the load balancing to weighted, every device or every AVF has that default value of 100. That means for every 200, because we have two AVFs, for every 200 MAC addresses that are handed out, half of them will be AVF1's MAC address, and half of them will be AVF2's MAC address, because they both have the same value of 100. But let's say we change the weighting. If you change the weighting and let's say you leave one of them at 100 and you change the other one to 60 for a weighting value, how will the MAC addresses be handed out now? Well, think of it overall as a complete of 160. So take 100, add 60 to it, now you have 160. So for every 160 MAC addresses that are handed out by the AVG, 100 of them will belong to AVF1, and 60 of them will belong to AVF2. So you can control now through the weighting option which active virtual forwarder will be responsible for the majority of traffic forwarding. So you don't have to have all the default gateways equally forwarding traffic. You can control it with the weighting value. However, host dependent. With host dependent, you can specifically indicate that the same client is always going to receive the same MAC address for forwarding. So you can control it that way as well with the host dependent option. But by default, since it's round robin, this is the result of our traffic flow with just the 3 PCs. Notice PC1's traffic is flowing through R1. PC2's traffic's flowing through R2. PC3's traffic's flowing through R1. So if we had PC4, can you guess which one of these routers would be the active virtual forwarder for PC4? Yeah, based on our simple topology, whereby the ARPs would have been, strategically sent PC1 first, then PC2, then PC3, then PC4, yeah, it's going to be R2. It's not as predictable in the real world because the ARP request can come out of the client at any time. You won't be able to control it specifically right down to the millisecond, but in our perfect world here, you can get the idea of how it works. How it works. But now what happens if we have a failure right here? What's going to happen? Does the AVG still exist? No, the hello packets no longer flow between R1 and R2. Since the hello packets no longer flow between R1 and R2, R2 has to promote itself as the AVG. In addition to that, R1 was the AVF for this MAC address right here. R2 has to take over that as well. So R2, because of this failure of the link, or it could have been a failure completely of R1, will take over as the AVG. It continues to be the AVF for, what do we say, for 2? And it now becomes the AVF for what? Number 1 as well. So this is how that overall process works. Simply by the loss of that hello packet, R2 can take over absolutely everything in this example. And now, without the end stations even knowing, all traffic's simply going through R2. Do the MAC addresses have to change on the PCs? No, not at all. Do the IP addresses have to change? No, not at all either. The traffic simply just goes through R2 now. And then, if we had preemption enabled and R1 has the higher priority, what happens when everything comes back to normal with R1 or this particular link right here? We just go back to the normal operation like this. Traffic from PC1 and PC3 end up going through R1, and PC2 continues to go through R2. If R2 failed, or the link here failed, since R2 is only an AVF, then R1 can take over that AVF role. So no matter what happens here with those links or routers failing, we can continue to successfully operate. Let me try that again. Successfully operate and have the load balancing and high availability that we need for the end stations within that local area network.